G'day YouTubers, how you all going? My name's Wilfred, West Wilfred's PC World, Lakeside Cottage in Loch Sport, Victoria, Australia. Today's date is the 4th of the 3rd, 2015, and it's 5 to 10 in the morning. Now, I did have originally the GoPro mounted up here. I've decided to put it onto the windscreen. I want to give this a test. But even with these 3 suction cups, it still comes off here. This must have some really good stuff protecting it. So, and also it gives me a different look as well. But I've had to rewire the fairy mic, if I can get. Oh, there we go. The fairy mic's here. So I've had to basically just run the wire up into here, and trying to find a spot to put the fairy mic so it still pick up my voice and pick up everything around it. I hope you like this video, and if so, please subscribe. Have a listen to the radio.
Because nothing in this bill says that the SMEs are going to be favoured over the big projects. That still has not been clarified. Considering the negative impact that mining has had on many communities in low-income countries, it is imperative that EPIC ensures that human rights are protected and that local people gain considerable benefit before money is poured into such projects. We need to get those standards right before the money is put in and the projects start racing ahead. Otherwise, the infrastructure is put in place, the Indigenous people, other local people are moved out, their livelihood that is so often drawn from the environment in which they live is destroyed. So projects that are pitched as bringing great wealth to a certain country can often be resulting in extreme hardship for most people. My hope is that this bill can address some of these issues. By opening up EPIC's eligible export transactions to include all goods, it is expected that more funds will flow to SMEs. This means less corporate welfare for mining giants operating in the world's poorest communities. So we're not saying that this bill is totally wrong. It certainly missed out on an opportunity of bringing in some of the recommendations from the Productivity Commission, but it does need to be tightened up in terms of the balance, in terms of where the bulk of the assistance goes. Because there is no guarantee that things are going to change in any substantial way, and we will need to monitor it closely. I note that Labor and the Coalition are supporting this bill, so we understand that it will go through. And largely for all the comments that was made by the Labor spokesperson on this, that they have been right there in terms of supporting EPIC in the way that it is operated, and haven't responded to the considerable criticisms and the widespread documentation of the abuses and crimes that many of these companies that have received EPIC funding have gone on to commit. The bill includes no obligation on EPIC to lend to SMEs, nor does it impose any restrictions on how much they lend to larger companies or to mining operations within Australia. That is one of the major flaws in this bill. Respect and protection for human rights of local people and respect and protection for their local environments must be a priority consideration for EPIC when deciding how to spend its funds. That has been raised year after year after year with successive governments in terms of how EPIC needed to be brought into line because there was so much damage resulting on projects that they were funding, and those requests have been ignored for so long, and it's disappointing we're again seeing that same trend occur with this bill. So at the moment, we don't feel confident about how the government is managing EPIC. The change, we acknowledge, has the potential to shift how the funding arrangements of EPIC occurred, but this bill certainly should be tightened up in certain very considerable ways, particularly with regard to the standards under which companies that receive EPIC assistance operate in low-income countries, and particularly to ensure that the SMEs do come under EPIC in a more considered way, and it isn't left in the vague form it currently is. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Rhiannon. Senator Linehill. Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to support the Australian taxpayer. Accordingly, I oppose the Export Finance and Insurance Corporation Amendment, Direct Lending and Other Measures Bill 2014. The Export Finance and Insurance Corporation, known as EFIC, is a government-owned bank and insurer. EFIC provides loans for exporters of capital goods, which represent 5% of exports. This bill would allow EFIC to provide loans for export transactions involving all goods, not just capital goods. As such, this bill represents a massive expansion of government-owned banking. Government-owned banking is not a great idea. The Treasurer put it nicely when he introduced a bill to abolish another government-owned bank, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. He said, and I quote, "Setting up a government bank with $10 billion of borrowed money underwritten by taxpayers to invest in high-risk ventures should be a thing of the past century. You would have
David Lionel, Liberal Democrats, New South Wales.
comes to government banks." End quote. The lessons the Treasurer was referring to came from the collapse of the State Bank of South Australia and the State Bank of Victoria. In both of those instances, the decision of governments to dabble in inherently risky lending caused considerable losses for taxpayers. That includes mum and dad taxpayers, who, unlike mum and dad shareholders, never had the choice of withdrawing their money. For a while, it seemed that Labor did indeed learn this lesson. When Labor was in government, it asked the Productivity Commission to consider whether EFIC's mandate should be extended to all exports, the very issue we are debating today. The Productivity Commission found there is little evidence of market failure in export finance that would support a role for government in export finance. The Commission explicitly recommended that EFIC's mandate not be extended to all exports. And the Labor government at the time, 2013, wholeheartedly agreed with this recommendation. Fast forward 2 years and Labor has a new position to support the extension of EFIC's mandate to all exports. It's bewildering, it's unprincipled, and it's thoroughly disappointing. One would have hoped the coalition would reduce rather than increase the role of EFIC too. After all, not only have they tried to abolish the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, but they established the National Commission of Audit, which came to the following conclusion about EFIC. Again,
in the public arena, dare I even say, fresh in my mind as it is, we see the way people comport themselves on Senate committees. Sometimes it seems that there is now open slaver on toxic and abusive language that's sanctioned by the very people who are then deploring the fact that there is bullying happening to our young people. We have a responsibility to model the sort of behaviour that we say is appropriate in this society. And too often I think that the leaders and those who have power in this country, whether it's shock jocks, whether it's media commentators, whether it's politicians, actually fail in that duty. And then we have the temerity to criticise young people for modelling what they see their elders do. So I think this whole discussion and concern about cyberbullying and bullying generally in what is often increasingly toxic.
Okay, welcome back YouTube. So as you can see, I'm getting a lot of reflections still off the windscreen, and it's still picking it up, I think. So it makes it hard trying to find a place and find something I can use that's going to do what I want to do. Yeah, well, all the leads are out the way, that's the main thing. Yeah, just makes it a bit annoying, that's all. Oh, well, we'll continue on driving and see how it goes. I hope it picks up my voice from here, because where it is, it's right near the visor, and normally I have it on the seatbelt. Oh, well. You enjoy the radio.
before I get into the substance of this bill, I think I will briefly respond to some of what Senator Wright had to say there, because firstly, I think it trivialises what is a very serious issue. Secondly, I think, you know, the sort of suggestion that was inherent in what Senator Wright was saying, that, you know, that members of the Senate or others have engaged in inappropriate behaviour in committees. I just find it interesting, given you know, it's some of Senator Wright's own colleagues, such as Senator Hanson-Young, who are, I would say, some of the worst offenders in haranguing witnesses and the like. So, I mean, this suggestion, I think, the utter hypocrisy of what we heard there. But what's a little bit more offensive even than the hypocrisy is actually the trivialisation of what is a very, very serious issue. And it doesn't take much to read through some of the reports of serious cyberbullying and you know, the real emotional toll that takes on some young people, and the comparison, I think, to sometimes what goes on in Senate estimates committees, I think is trivialising this issue. I think it's trivialising what is a very important issue, and I do want to lend my support to this bill because I think it's an important bill and I think it's an important debate. It is, in this age of technology and global communications, we can of course all attest to how the online space has improved our capacity to learn, to grow and to communicate with others, and that is a wonderful thing. It is something to celebrate. It has benefits for adults, it has benefits for children if done well, if done in a safe environment, and if we have the proper safeguards in place. But of course, we all know about the dangers of this space, and I'll go to some of those in a moment. There are significant dangers. We know that vulnerable people in our community, especially children, that there are dangers in this space. And of course, just as there is with other human interactions. But things like social media, we see all pervasive. We see in some people's lives, they are a constant. And so we see a different type of threat, I guess, emerging for our children in this space that needs a different type of response. In 2014, the University of New South Wales Social Policy Research Centre concluded that the best estimate of cyberbullying over a 12-month period is 20% of Australians aged 8 to 17. Cyberbullying was most prominent in children aged between 10 and 15, with prevalence decreasing for the 16 to 17 age bracket. Now, these figures mean that the estimated number of children and young people who have been victims of cyberbullying in 2013 is 463,000, with around 365,000 in the 10 to 15 age group. Social media is creating a very substantial new workload for school principals and teachers, as well as parents. The UNSW research found that 87% of secondary schools reported at least one instance of cyberbullying in 2013, as did just under 60% of primary schools. Research from the UNSW Social Policy Research Centre also concluded that, quote, the most important barrier encountered by police and other agencies in dealing with cyberbullying is the lack of accountability of social media and other service providers, who are reluctant to take down offensive material and are often slow to respond to such requests, even from police, unquote. Now, we want our kids to be able to take advantage of the vast resources the internet provides, and of course our kids do. It has become just part of the learning environment now to be online. And I have 5 children of my own, and a couple of them are in their teenage years, and I am, as a parent, very, very conscious of both the opportunities and the dangers in this space, and that's very much what this legislation is about. It is about some balance in this space. I talked about some of the, I guess, the shocking incidents of cyberbullying. I want to say a couple of things about that before I go to a couple of those particular examples. Firstly, that bullying is nothing new. Before we had cyberbullying, we had other types of bullying. School can be a very tough place. It's a tough place when I was at school. school is a tough place. It's a tough place now in many circumstances. And we do all we can as parents, and I know that teachers and administrators and principals do all they can to make school as safe a place for children as possible. But bullying does go on, and sometimes it gets very serious. Sometimes we see kids self-harming in response. Sometimes, tragically, we see young people taking their own lives, in partially in response to that type of bullying. And when we look at this issue, though, there's a couple of important points for me as a parent and for us as legislators. Of course, we need to build resilience in our kids. Of course, there are going to be people who are not nice to them at school, online. There are going to be people who seek to bully them. That, unfortunately, has always been a part of life. It's not an acceptable part of life. It's something we should condemn. It's something we should do all we can to protect our children from.
As a conservative, I would look at some stuff and say, well, why are they allowing that? And yet they'll tear down this. There seems to be, a bit of political correctness in operation at some of them. So, we're adults and we should be able to deal with this stuff. But I do understand how this sort of intimidation or things that denigrate children or make them feel terribly uncomfortable should be removed. And I think this is a positive step. The other aspect of it, Senator Lowe touched on it, which is about allowing the Commissioner to issue a notice to an individual who posted material, requiring them to remove it. I think that's reasonable and appropriate if the social media site won't do it. Refrain from posting it again. I think once again, I think that's reasonable. But I do share Senator Lowe's thoughts about the apology. You're going to have to issue an apology for posting something that's negative about someone else, even though you might not have breached any particular law. And I'm with Senator Lane in the sense that apologies are only worthwhile if they're voluntary. It's like any sort of moral code or any adherence to any faith. When you're coerced into doing it, it lacks this genuineness, and it's worth much, much less than something that is truly heartfelt. It also, let me just go back to the first bit about the media services, the social media services, where they are approached by the Commissioner. If they fail to respond to a notice the Commissioner has put forward, then he can insist that there is a legal duty to remove the material, and they will face significant fines where it needs to be done. Now, I think this is actually quite reasonable as well, and I'll tell you why. In the adult world, if you're maligned by, for example, a media organisation, and that media organisation allows comments to appear on their blog which further malign you or defame you, or they have a Facebook page in which people post defamatory or other comments that are inappropriate, the media organisation is legally liable for those comments under the Publications Act, I think. And in those circumstances, there are legal avenues in which you can redress any sort of calumny that you feel has been foisted upon you. However, in the world of children who are perhaps less circumspect about the materials that they will post online, and particularly, I have to say, much less so than my generation, because they've grown up with it in the modern age. They don't really have those avenues of legal redress, and I'm not sure that it's appropriate for a child to be suing another child because they've been offended. But it is important that there is a step that where things are inappropriate, a commissioner can step in, or a responsible entity can step in and say, okay, let's try and have this removed without having to go through any convoluted legal practice. So I do think that is reasonable, and it is incumbent upon some of the social media organisations, which I must say are companies in the tens and tens of billions of dollars. They cannot be the Pontius Pilate and wash their hands of responsibility in respect to basic decency in many of these issues, and particularly where it affects children. So the Commissioner can insist the service has a legal duty to remove the material. and it can impose fines where it fails to do so. The fine would be $17,000 for each day the service doesn't act in response to the Commissioner. And in addition to the complaints system, the Commissioner can also be tasked with implementing policies to improve safety for children online. He or she will be responsible for $7.5 million in funding for online safety programs in schools and overseeing research and information campaigns regarding online safety. Now, all these things are I'm sure, very helpful initiatives. I think many schools already run online safety initiatives. I know in my experience where boundaries on social media have been crossed, I think many parents, many students are made aware of it by the schools. I think they have certainly a direct engagement, because ultimately these things can impact the health and well-being, particularly the mental well-being of our next generation. But of course it is a growing issue, this cyberbullying, and I'm not sure we're ever going to be able to eradicate it, because there have always been bullies, whether it be the colour of your hair or how tall you were, or whether you had too many donuts at recess time, which I may have been guilty of as acting deputy president, eating the donuts, I must say, and the effects thereof. Yes, I picked up sport late in life, as you said, Nicole. But there's always something. Kids are always going to home in on some other issue about another kid, and friendships go in and out of favour, and we all do things as children that we regret later in life, and it's just part of growing up in the learning circle. And as I started my comments today, I think there's an element of this which teaches children resilience, and parents have to have that conversation. You have to say, well, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Those sorts of old-fashioned values that not everything is a cause for some sort of intervention. You've just got to learn how to deal with some things. Now, I want to restate, I'm not making excuses for some of the harmful practices that go on. There are terrible things that go on, and kids suffer immeasurably from it. They suffer from peer group pressure, they suffer from all sorts of that happen in it, and there needs to be means in which we can do it. But it is not solely the responsibility of government to step into the space. The government, we need to ensure that government provides opportunities where redress is not normally available. I think that's appropriate. Where schools perhaps are failing, I think the education programs and those sorts of things should go on there. But we cannot protect children from all harm, no matter how much we'd like to. We can't, because if we actually seek to do that, if we stop them from climbing trees and taking risks and learning about that there are bad people in society as well, and bad things that can happen to good people, you're actually building a much more fragile, I think, adult society as a result. But this is a step. It's a step, I think, in the right direction. I just don't want to see it overlooked. But I do agree with some of my colleagues that say, this is one of the most confronting things for society today. It's not often I quote President Barack Obama, the American president, but I do think he said that one of the great challenges facing children today was going to be their contribution to social media. That will have perhaps more of an impact on their future life than almost anything else. Because what you do in your 10 minutes of music is there forever online, and that's one of the great challenges for I think the next generation, in particular when they go to employment and they start to look around and say, well, gosh, should I have really done that? But at 16, I guess like a tattoo. At 18, it seems like a good idea, and at 45, it doesn't seem quite so clever. With all apologies to those who like their tattoos, but the point of it is that all our children now are vulnerable to this sort of approach. We've got to ensure that there is a degree of prudence, making allowance for their youthfulness and indiscretions that take place along with those lines. But we also need to make sure that society as a whole, I think, understands the true long-term implications of where we're at with this. Because I'd hate to see young children or young adults, or teenagers I should say, penalised in some sort of long-term sense because of mistakes they make when they're 15 or 16. We do allow all sorts of circumstances to go under the radar. If someone commits a legal offence, for example, as a juvenile, it's not necessarily carried over to their adult record. I don't think it is. We allow certain criminal convictions to be expunged after a certain period of time. So we do believe in redemption. Unfortunately, in his instance, many of the stuff that goes online, there's no opportunity for that. So I'm loath to judge the youth of today too much for the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And so allowing a reasonable approach, allowing parents and schools and individuals to approach someone that's notionally independent about this and seek redress without having to resort to lengthy legal argument or anything else, I think is a positive step in the right direction. But I will never endorse the replacement of responsibility, both individual responsibility and where there is a diminished responsibility by way of youth or age, the responsibility of parents and schools and other adults that are central to the lives of that child to instruct the child, to teach them, to negotiate with them, to talk with them about some of the issues and some of the consequences, potential consequences, whether they be a recipient of this sort of bullying or whether they be the perpetrator of it. Because in my experience, and I'm talking with other parents in the peer group of my own children, it's a very, very fine line. And quite often it is simply the wrong choice of words or the wrong emoticon or whatever they choose to put in there that can be picked up. But I do commend the government for tackling it. I think it is important that the government have a look at this. I mean, we are having to deal and tackle the issues that are going to be facing our community for a long, long time to come. And one of the most important issues that we have is that we have resilient, well-rounded, well-adjusted children that are free to pursue their lives in a healthy environment. We want to protect them from harm as much as we can, and that includes not only physical harm, but it includes the emotional harm that can be just as devastating to their self-esteem as anything else. And we know that it can be a single comment or two comments or something like that drives people in directions that are really very negative, whether it be into eating disorders or to self-harm or into hurting others or even down even worse pathways. And that's the sort of thing governments need to invest in. So an ounce of prevention is always better than a pound of cure. Let's work towards that prevention, but let's work towards it collaboratively with parents, with schools, with counsellors that are in many schools today, and amongst their peer group. And one of the greatest things that I think I was taught, and I've sought to teach my children, it's still a work in progress, is, how would you like that if that was done to you? And it makes you stop and think before you act. And I think that's a really sage advice.
My God, this fucking senator waffles on too much.
Anyone that has a brush.
I thought I was bad.
Process,
you could have said all this in 5 minutes, right? And had the next speakers up and running. Or less than 5 minutes.
Does the wrong thing online.
But he's constantly saying the same thing over and over and over again.
They go through this process, they will learn their lesson, and as a result we'll have better citizens in the future and a more considerate society that says,
one thing I really hate about politicians.
Do unto others as you have them do unto you.
Thank you, Senator Bernardi. Senator Xenophon.
Independent, South Australia.
I'd like to express my support for measures in this bill. Cyberbullying is a relatively new phenomenon, but unfortunately the motivations behind it are not. Thankfully, we now have a better understanding of real psychological harm bullying can cause in all its forms.
God,
and it
we
isn't
already
just part of
fucking
life
know
or a
that.
normal part of growing up. It is not.
We've known that for over
Cyberbullying
fucking
is
20
in some ways
years.
more insidious than bullying that takes place in
Okay.
person. For people who are subjected to this harassment,
Why do you keep
there
constantly
can be little
crap on it?
escape. A 24-hour access to technology means that bullying doesn't end at the school gate. The anonymity and distance provided by technology means that bullies often go further than they perhaps would if they were face-to-face with their victim. Mr. Acting Deputy President, these are keyboard cowards. Perhaps saying things to a screen is easier than saying to someone's face. Online culture also contributes.
My name's Wilfred, West Wilfred's PC World, Lakeside Cottage and Loch Sport, Victoria, Australia, signing off. Thank you for watching my videos, and all comments are welcome. You all have a great day now.